As one of TNA Wrestling's biggest events of the year, Slammiversary is bound to have had more than a few plans changing going into the show. But just how different would things have been if the following ideas actually took place? Welcome to Lace 'em Up Media, and here are 10 Slammiversary plans that almost happened. Number 10. A last-minute switch. Heading into Slammiversary 2018, two major feuds were going on within the Knockouts division. Ali was battling Su Yung and Madison Rayne was battling Tessa Blanchard. Essentially, it was two established stars feuding against the company's newest acquisition, albeit the stories were drastically different from each other. Madison had actually picked up a series of victories over Blanchard on TV, and it looked as though the feud would culminate at TNA's biggest event of the summer. However, in the weeks leading up to the show, Ali suddenly began feuding with Tessa while Su Yung turned her attention to Madison. It's unclear what caused the sudden change, but the end result saw Tessa picking up the win over Ali at Slammiversary, and Su Yung retaining her Knockouts championship before stuffing Madison into a coffin and being written out of the company for a pretty unremarkable run in Ring of Honor. Number 9. The Sting/Daniels feud. Although a match between Christopher Daniels and Sting did indeed take place at Slammiversary 2007 with the Icon winning in 6.5 minutes, the initial plan was to help elevate Daniels by working a program with the Stinger. According to interviews, Daniels was informed by head booker Vince Russo that he would be working with Sting and a match would take place at Slammiversary. Daniels would play up more to his fallen angel persona as a holier-than-thou character, and the match would either see Daniels cheat to win or sneak attack Sting after the match to get his heat back. Instead, the angle was rushed with little to no build-up, Daniels was soundly beaten, and the angle ended soon afterwards with the fallen angel looking no better than he had before entering this short-lived program with Sting. Number 8. The Kazarian/Styles segment. AJ Styles made his long-awaited return to TNA at last year's Slammiversary, and it was easily one of the highlights of the night. This led many to wonder if Styles would come back for at least one more match in the company he helped make famous. Most expected at least a one-on-one match with Styles and fellow TNA original Frankie Kazarian, and given their history together, the match would have been amazing. In fact, plans were in place for AJ and Kazarian to have a segment with each other at the pay-per-view, thus sowing the seeds for a future matchup. WWE on the other hand shot those plans down with the reasons why being purely speculative. Considering AJ's retirement from in-ring competition earlier this year, the chances of Styles having his last match in a TNA ring is more than likely over. Still, if he came back to be inducted into the TNA Hall of Fame, I don't think most fans would mind. Number 7. AJ's backup partners. AJ Francis has certainly taken his career to a whole new level since first appearing in TNA in early 2024 and even forming his own faction known as First Class. At Slammiversary 2025, AJ was one of several wrestlers to take part in a ladder match for the TNA World Tag Team Championships with his partner KC Navarro. The match saw Navarro suffering a torn ACL and he would be out of action for the rest of the year. Prior to this match, though, it was unclear if KC would be cleared to compete, and as such a replacement was needed just in case. According to Francis while talking on the Ariel Helwani show, the plan was to have Rich Swann return and team with AJ for the ladder match in order to reunite the original first-class duo. The other option would have seen former NXT star Ashante the Adonis be revealed as AJ's partner due to their previous history in the WWE as part of the Hit Row stable. Thankfully, Navarro was cleared to wrestle, and by the time KC was kicked out of First Class, he was replaced by returning Rich Swann. And speaking of Swann. Number 6. Rich Swann, two-time digital media champion. One of the more high-profile matches at Slammiversary 2024 saw AJ Francis defend his digital media championship and the Canadian Heavyweight Championship against Canada's own PCO. But it might shock you to hear that the person who would have been champion going into that match was actually Rich Swann. Original plans were in place to have Rich Swann regain the digital media title and become the only two-time champion in the belt's history. Swann declined the offer and suggested that AJ should win the belt instead, which was a much better option in hindsight. But for more on our thoughts on AJ's time as champion, check out our ranking video from a year ago on the best and worst digital media champions in TNA. Number 5. Scott D'Amore and PCO vs. Bully Ray and Steve Maclin. 1 year earlier, PCO was in another match where plans changed at the last second, as Slammiversary 2023 was set to see Scott D'Amore and PCO take on the team of Bully Ray and Steve Maclin. However, injuries Macklin sustained during a show in Australia and PCO being written out for undisclosed reasons saw returning Eric Young become Scott's new partner and Cody Deaner become Bully Ray's new partner. Which is like gearing up for a tag team match, only to find out the match now involves The Miz and Kit Wilson versus Danhausen and a mini Danhausen. Number 4. The Good Brothers and Tessa Blanchard. The duo of Carl Anderson and Doc Gallows announced their signing to TNA only a few minutes after their no-compete clauses came to an end, which just so happened to be the exact same day TNA was having their annual Slammiversary event. The show concluded with Anderson and Gallows saving Eddie Edwards from a beatdown at the hands of Ace Austin and Madman Fulton following the main event, but the original plans that the Good Brothers proposed would have been more impactful. The story goes is that Tessa Blanchard, who was TNA World Champion at the time, was supposed to defend her title at Slammiversary, but issues arose between her and management, and her contract was set to expire weeks before the pay-per-view anyway. It's presumed that had Blanchard's contract been extended all the way towards Slammiversary, the third-generation star would drop the title in the main event before the Good Brothers came out to attack Blanchard, which could have been used by management as a way to write Tessa out of the company. Due to Blanchard being fired weeks prior, those plans were ultimately scrapped. Number 3. Steve Macklin and Josh Alexander, TNA Tag Team Champions. Josh Alexander's heel turn during the main event of Slammiversary 2024 was certainly shocking as no one expected the walking weapon to turn heel, but his turn to the dark side did allow him to play a more nefarious side fans weren't too familiar with. This was on display during his renewed rivalry with Steve Macklin in late 2024, with the two men put on some incredible matches both at Bound for Glory and Turning Point. However, the road to that feud would have looked differently had it not been for Joe Hendry. No, seriously. According to both Alexander and Macklin, the idea was instead to have the two of them become a tag team and win the tag straps off of the system before losing them to the Hardys months later, thus kicking off Josh's heel turn and the feud as a whole. But once Joe Hendry became a megastar thanks to the success of his theme song hitting the charts in the UK, suddenly he became the biggest thing in wrestling and TNA had no choice but to insert him into their main event plans. With Hendry needing someone to feud with before going for the title, Alexander, who was going to turn heel sooner than later, was then added to the multi-man title match at Slammiversary, as well as Steve Macklin as the company still wanted Macklin and Alexander to have their impending feud. Number 2. Andrade comes to TNA. Following his successful title defense over Sami Callihan in the main event of Slammiversary 2021, Kenny Omega, who was flanked by the Good Brothers and Don Callis, was soon confronted by none other than New Japan wrestler Jay White. The image of a New Japan star confronting an AEW star who also happened to be the TNA World Champion was something that completely blew everyone's mind. And we almost didn't get this moment had the initial plans actually happened. See, around this time Mexican superstar Andrade El Idolo was a free agent after getting his release from WWE in 2021, and it wasn't quite clear as to where he might show up next. Reports at the time suggest that TNA were in talks with Andrade with the idea of having him show up to confront Kenny Omega nearing the end of Slammiversary, with Andrade being flanked by the legendary Conan as his manager. It's also believed that this would lead to a 6-man tag team match between the Good Brothers and Omega against Andrade and 2 other wrestlers. But disagreements regarding money is what prevented this from happening. Considering how his first run in AEW and his return to WWE in 2024 were both seen as disappointments, it's interesting to see what Andrade could have done had a deal been ironed out with TNA. Number 1. MVP, TNA World Champion. In the summer of 2014, MVP was the on-screen authority figure for TNA, and on the May 8th edition of Impact, he attacked World Heavyweight Champion Eric Young after revealing himself to be the number 1 contender for EY's title in the main event of that year's Slammiversary. Unfortunately for the former United States champion, he suffered a torn meniscus which took him out of the match and led to some qualifying matches on the pay-per-view, with the winners facing Eric Young in a triple threat steel cage match. What some fans may not know, however, is that had MVP been cleared to compete in the main event, he was scheduled to win and become the new TNA World Champion, thus fulfilling a goal he was unable to achieve during his time in the WWE. The company instead pivoted to Bobby Lashley being the guy to beat EY for the title, which he did on the June 19th edition of Impact. Although it's a shame MVP never got to be a world champion for a major wrestling promotion, the win did help in elevating Lashley into becoming TNA's final boss in the following years. And that's our list. Be sure to like the video and subscribe for more content. Don't forget to follow us on X and Bluesky Social, and hit the notifications bell so you never miss another one of our videos when it drops.